Humanity is being threatened by giant bugs known as the Vek. The only force strong enough to oppose these monsters are building-sized robots called mechs, and the pilots controlling them. You are the commander of these pilots, you are humanity's last hope, and this is Into the Breach. Into the Breach consists of a variety of levels called missions. Each mission takes place on an 8x8 grid of squares containing buildings, environmental tiles, mechs, and the Vek. The primary objective of each mission is to protect as many buildings as possible from Vek attacks. At the top of the screen is a bar labeled Power Grid. Every time a building is destroyed or damaged, your power goes down. If it runs out, game over. The mission is taken in turns. At the beginning of each turn, the bugs move around the grid and aim their attacks. Different types of bugs have different attacks. Some shoot projectiles in straight lines, some shoot arcing projectiles that travel over obstacles to come down on a target, some lay eggs that will hatch into more bugs. However, they all have one thing in common. They don't act right away. They must set up their actions ahead of time, and this gives you a chance to stop them. After they prepare their attacks, the player can then command their mechs. Each mech can move once per turn and can take an action, such as firing a weapon, using an ability, repairing, etc. Like the bugs, different types of mechs have different weapons and abilities. Once the player's mechs have all taken their actions, the Vek then execute their attacks, and the next turn begins. This is where Into the Breach deviates the most from other turn-based strategy games. Rather than enemies simply taking their actions immediately and forcing the player to deal with the aftermath, Into the Breach shows the player what could happen and gives you a chance to stop it. An important aspect of many mechs is the fact that their weapons, in addition to damaging targets, will push them around. If a bug is lining up a shot on a building, the player can push the bug one square to the side, causing the projectile to harmlessly fly past the building. The bugs are committed to their attacks once they've set them up, which means you can manipulate them into missing their intended targets or even attacking each other. This, combined with the fact that there are no dice rolls to determine whether things work or not, gives the player a feeling of control you don't often find in turn-based strategy games. Missions are varied not just by their layout, but also by secondary objectives, such as protecting specific buildings or killing a minimum number of Vek, and by the environmental hazards, tidal waves slowly washing away the grid, thunderstorms striking random areas. But even these aren't meant to feel random. Icons will telegraph where they'll hit beforehand. As the player completes missions, they earn reputation, also known as rep, which can be spent on new weapons or abilities for your mechs. Additionally, as you complete specific actions called achievements, you earn coins, which can be spent to unlock new squads of mechs. Each squad has a specialty that makes them interesting to play. The flame behemoths light the grid on fire, creating environmental hazards for the Vek that the behemoths don't have to deal with, thanks to their fireproofing. The frozen titans can encase enemies in ice. Frozen bugs can't do anything and are essentially harmless, but if they're struck by any attack, they break out. This leads to players needing to protect not only the buildings, but frozen bugs from being freed. It's not all cool and interesting, though. There's very little story, so anyone looking for compelling writing or characters should look elsewhere. It's also quite short. I was able to beat it for the first time in just under 6 hours. Also, despite being the size of skyscrapers, the mechs and the bugs are all very small, and everything taking place on a grid that's only 8x8 doesn't really help. If you were wowed by the larger-than-life robots and monsters in movies like Pacific Rim, you're not going to get that same kind of feeling of scale that you get from these little bots and beetles. Even though it's small, the game's built for replayability. All missions are procedurally generated, which means that while each type of mission has the same general layout, the exact locations of things and the types of enemies you face will be different each time. Plus, there are 9 different squads to play as, and you can build your own custom squads or roll the dice and make a randomized team of robots. I really like Into the Breach. After I beat it the first time, I went on to play through it again 2 more times, and I could see myself playing through it at least a few more times to try out different combinations of mechs. If outwitting giant bugs with giant robots sounds like your kind of fun, you can pick up Into the Breach on Steam for the PC, or on the Nintendo Store for the Switch, just $15 US or your regional equivalent.